going so well. With us tonight, we have the government, the SNP, Labour's Jess Phillips, the former Governor of the Bank of England, Mark Carney, and have I got news for you? Broadcaster and satirist Ian Hislop. Join us after the news.
This is BBC One in the East. Now the BBC News with Sophie Rayworth and Mosemi Bakshi at 10 o'clock.
Tonight at 10, the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine is declared safe and effective by the EU's medical regulator. France, Germany, Italy and Spain are among the EU nations that will now resume the rollouts of the jab after pausing it amid concerns about blood clots.
This is a safe and effective vaccine. Its benefits in protecting people from COVID-19 with the associated risks of death and hospitalisation outweigh the possible risks.
Here, despite a problem with supplies from India, the government says no vaccination appointments will be cancelled.
Our progress along the road to freedom continues unchecked. We remain on track to reclaim the things we love, to see our families and friends again.
Almost half the UK's adult population has now been vaccinated. Also on the programme tonight. Pressure grows on the First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon. It's understood the Holyrood Committee investigating the handling of harassment claims against Alex Salmond believes she misled their inquiry. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex condemn the predatory practices of the British tabloids after the Sun paid a US private investigator to gather information about Meghan Markle. He says he then acted illegally. And a decade after the war in Syria began, the misery inflicted on a nation, we look at the role of President Assad during this brutal conflict.
Here in the East, reinforcing the rules in a COVID hotspot, we're with the COVID marshals in Peterborough. And the desperate plea from beauty businesses who say they've received no financial support.
Good evening. Most of the European countries that suspended the use of the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine have said they will start using it again after the EU's medical regulator declared it safe and effective. Italy, Germany, France and Spain are among those resuming use of the jab after a pause over fears of a link to blood clots in a small number of people. Here, the UK's regulator said any link between the jab and clots is unproven and the benefits of the AstraZeneca vaccine outweigh any risks. Here's our medical editor, Fergus Walsh.
Every injection, every vaccine given is another person protected. 500,000 people a day here are getting immunised at present. Many EU countries suspended using the Oxford AstraZeneca jab pending the outcome of today's safety review. In Hull, there was no sign of vaccine hesitancy.
I was waiting a long time. I'm like in my 60s, so I've only just really got mine, so I was just happy it's finally done.
I just took on board, this is my appointment, this is what needs doing, this is keeping everyone safe, so let's go ahead and get it done.
The UK medicines regulator said after a rigorous review, there was no evidence that blood clots were caused by the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine. It looked in particular at 5 cases of rare clots in the brain among 11 million people immunised by the NHS. All were men under 60, one of whom died. It said given the link was unproven, the benefits of the vaccine far outweighed potential side effects. For those in their 40s, the risk of dying after COVID infection is 1 in 1,000. As a precautionary measure, it's advising anyone with a headache that lasts more than 4 days after vaccination to seek medical attention.
There is no difference that blood clots in veins are occurring more than would be expected in the absence of vaccination for either vaccine. The public can have every confidence in the thoroughness of our review. Mrs. Ima Cook.
And in Amsterdam, the European Medicines Agency has come to the same conclusion about the AstraZeneca jab.
This is a safe and effective vaccine. Its benefits in protecting people from COVID-19 with the associated risks of death and hospitalization outweigh the possible risks. The committee also concluded that the vaccine is not associated with an increase in the overall risk of thromboembolic events or blood clots.
The Prime Minister, who's 56, will get his first dose of the AstraZeneca vaccine tomorrow and said all adults would be offered a jab by the end of July.
Our progress along the road to freedom continues unchecked. We remain on track to reclaim the things we love, to see our families and friends again, to return to our local pubs, our gyms and sports facilities, and, of course, our shops. All, of course, as long as the data continue to go in the right direction and we meet our 4 tests.
Those in their 40s seem likely to have to wait until May to get their first vaccine because older people will be getting their second shot and there won't be enough extra doses to go around due to supply issues caused by a delay in a delivery of vaccine from India and a batch here that needed retesting. Half of all adults in the UK have now had a first dose of vaccine. The head of the NHS in England, Sir Simon Stevens, got the AstraZeneca jab at Westminster Abbey. Safe and effective vaccines will answer all our prayers to be delivered from this pandemic. Fergus Walsh, BBC News.
Well, our Europe editor Katya Adler is in Brussels now. Safe and effective is the verdict. Is this going to be enough to restore confidence in the EU?
Well, Sophie, let me explain why that is such an important question, because here in mainland Europe, COVID infections are again on the rise. If you have a look at parts of Central and Eastern Europe, you have some of the highest death rates now in the whole world. And today, France joined Germany and Italy that recently said that they are facing a third wave. So the EU desperately needs to vaccinate people, but it faces 2 big problems. Number one is supply. The EU simply doesn't have enough vaccines at the moment. And the second big problem is public acceptance, because many Europeans, Sophie, are more vaccine wary than their counterparts in the UK. And EU leaders' on-again, off-again relationship with the AstraZeneca jab really hasn't helped matters. I mean, remember back in January when some EU leaders were suggesting it might not be as effective in the over 65s, then they changed their minds. Now there were the worries about blood clots. So a lot of people have been put off. Angela Merkel admitted that the jab has what she called an acceptance problem in Germany, and in France the Prime Minister said he would be getting the AstraZeneca jab in order to try and boost public confidence. But critics of how the EU has handled all this say it could be too late. A lot of damage has already been done.
Katya, thank you. And let's talk now to our political editor Laura Kuenssberg in Westminster. And concerns today about supplies of the jab here.
Well, that's right, Sophie. After all the squall over the vaccine, over safety and also over supplies, we learned yesterday there's a real slowdown the amount that'll be arriving into the UK. I think the Prime Minister himself felt that he had to get out there, front up to the concerns, because I think there was a bit of a worry, a bit of a niggle inside government that there might be some little hints about public confidence not being where it should be. And it has in this country, by comparison with others in the European Union, been sky high. So the Prime Minister was out there saying reassurance on, number one, its safety, boasting of his own vaccine tomorrow when he'll be rolling up his own sleeves. Secondly, on supply, that although there has been a bit of a slowdown and the government won't be able to speed ahead with their plan, they will absolutely be able to stick to their targets by giving everybody over 18 their first dose by the end of July. And lastly, he also was determined to reassure on the bigger question, the vaccine's role in the gradual opening of the country's doors. And he was adamant, he said several times, that for now we would be sticking to the so-called roadmap, moving cautiously and carefully through different stages. But the vaccine is such a vital part of that. You can see today that the government's absolutely adamant they do not want the public's faith in the programme to be dented.
Laura Kuenssberg in Westminster, thank you. The pressure on Scotland's First Minister Nicola Sturgeon has intensified tonight after reports suggesting the majority of MSPs on the Holyrood Committee investigating the handling of harassment claims against Alex Salmond believe she misled their inquiry. It's understood they voted 5-4 that Ms Sturgeon gave them an inaccurate account when she answered their questions last Thursday. Tonight, Nicola Sturgeon said the committee had prejudged her from the outset and that she stood by the 8 hours of evidence she gave to the committee. Our Scotland editor Sarah Smith is in Glasgow for us tonight. Sarah.
Well, that Holyrood committee met tonight to finalise its report, and these stories were leaking out whilst that meeting was still going on. And sources close to the committee say they have concluded by a very small majority that Nicola Sturgeon did mislead them about an aspect of a meeting she had with Alex Salmond in her home in April 2018. Now, it's important to stress these findings have not been published yet, but already there are calls for Nicola Sturgeon to resign. Nicola Sturgeon, under oath, I solemnly, sincerely gave 8 hours of evidence to the Holyrood Harassment Committee. If they conclude she misled them in any of what she said, that could be a breach of the ministerial code. The opposition are already calling for her to resign.
It's absolutely abundantly clear that Nicola Sturgeon has breached the ministerial code. As First Minister, you cannot continue if you have been untruthful, if you have misled Parliament and you've misled the people of Scotland. It is a resigning matter, pure and simple.
Two very different versions of events have come from Nicola Sturgeon and from Alex Salmond. They cannot both be telling the truth. A spokesperson for the First Minister says, the First Minister told the truth to the committee in 8 hours of evidence and stands by that evidence. It's clear from past public statements that opposition members of this committee had prejudged the First Minister at the outset of the inquiry and before hearing a word of her evidence.
This committee has unfortunately experienced an awful lot of leaking and information coming out in ways that are neither helpful nor necessarily accurate. I think that this is more of the challenge that we see again here, and I'll be waiting to hear from the actual report.
It's not just Nicola Sturgeon's job that could be in jeopardy if she is found to have misled Parliament. She's about to lead her party into crucial Scottish parliamentary elections in just 7 weeks' time. The final judgment of the Holyrood Harassment Committee and another inquiry that's looking into whether or not she breached the ministerial code now looks set to dominate that campaign. Nicola Sturgeon tonight has hit out at what she calls partisan leaks, saying that some opposition members of the committee had clearly made up their minds before she'd even uttered a single word of evidence. Well, we will get the final conclusion of that Holyrood committee and of another inquiry that's specifically looking at whether or not Nicola Sturgeon breached the ministerial code of conduct in the next few days. Once those are published, we'll have that final resolution, but the arguing will probably only just have started.
Sarah Smith, thank you. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex have issued a statement tonight after it was revealed that the Sun newspaper had paid an American private investigator to obtain personal information about Meghan Markle in the early days of their relationship. He admits to breaking the law. Tonight, Prince Harry and Meghan said now is a moment to reflect on the predatory practices of the media, who they say are reaping irreversible damage on families and relationships. The publisher of The Sun, News UK, accepts they paid the investigator, but insists they never asked for or knew of any unlawful activity. Our media editor, Amol Rajan's report contains flashing images.
We all know what the British press can be like, and it was destroying my mental health. I was like, this is toxic.
Prince Harry has long had a fraught relationship with Britain's tabloid press, as he told James Corden recently. He's suing both the former publishers of The Sun and the Daily Mirror over allegations of phone hacking and other illegal activity before 2011. Witnesses at the Leveson inquiry into press ethics in 2012 included celebrities, politicians, and a former editor of The Sun and News of the World. Since 2015, Rebecca Brooks has been the boss of The Sun's publisher, Rupert Murdoch's News UK, and was later cleared on all charges of phone hacking. Page 9 of her first written witness statement to the inquiry, dated October 2011, said of private investigators, the industry cracked down on the use of investigators until I believe their use is now virtually extinct.
So we're going to look at privacy and harassment law.
4 years after Leveson, in 2016, Meghan Markle was working as an actor in the legal drama Suits. Shortly after Meghan's relationship with Prince Harry was revealed, a private investigator based in California and now retired was paid by The Sun to get detailed personal information about her and her family. He believes some of what he then did was unlawful. In accessing a particular one-stop database as a licensed private investigator and giving a false statement about what he was using the data for, Dano Hanks breached federal law.
Pretty much everything that I found out, they could find out themselves using, legal means, with the exception of the Social Security numbers. When you have that information, it's the key to the kingdom, especially Social Security number. Because you can contact any other thing. You can contact the bank. You can contact, phone companies.
It is important to stress there is no evidence that there was such misuse in this instance. The BBC has seen and corroborated this so-called comprehensive report on Meghan and her family, for which Hanks was paid by The Sun, as well as the remittances for payments that he received from News UK for this and many other reports. Hanks says The Sun wrote to him in 2012, instructing him to act within the law, and he later confirmed this in his invoices. But he feels they could have done more. Did anyone from The Sun at any point say, we've got some concerns about how you get this information?
No, they never asked. They didn't care.
Is Hanks a reliable source? A sometime actor and Vietnam veteran, he was jailed 4 times, including for extortion, and had been a private investigator for decades. A statement from News Group newspapers says, The Sun made a legitimate request for contact details relating to Meghan Markle, for which Mr. Hanks was paid $250. They say he was instructed and undertook in writing to act lawfully, and that the information provided could not and did not raise any concerns. They also say they did not request her social security number, that none of the information was used for any unlawful practice, and that The Sun abides by all laws and regulations. Hanks was initially being approached by a freelance journalist who was previously sentenced for phone hacking and now reports on press ethics. His website is funded by supporters of press reform and spun off from a media group that has received funding from the likes of Max Mosley and Hugh Grant. He paid Hanks for access to his documents.
This story definitely sticks out in the post-Leveson world because it's taken place 5 years after we thought these practices had stopped.
This evening, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex responded through a spokesperson to say they feel this investigative report shows that the predatory practices of days past are still ongoing, reaping irreversible damage for families and relationships. Hanks says watching Harry and Meghan's interview with Oprah Winfrey prompted his confession. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle might well be listening to you right now. What would you like to say to them directly?
I'm deeply sorry for what I did. If your lawyers need to talk to me to help you with these cases, I'm ready to give you what I know.
Amol Rajan, BBC News.
The latest coronavirus figures show there were 6,303 new cases recorded in the latest 24-hour period, which means on average the number of new cases reported per day in the last week is 5,601. The number of patients in hospital with COVID continues to fall, now down to 7,218, the lowest since the middle of October. There were 95 deaths reported of people who died within 28 days of a positive COVID-19 test, which means, on average, 108 deaths were reported every day in the past week from coronavirus, taking the total number of deaths so far to 125,926. As for vaccinations, more than 462,000 people had their first dose of a COVID vaccine in the latest 24-hour period, which takes the total number of people who've now had their first jab to more than 25.7 million. 49% of the UK adult population have now had their first vaccination, and nearly 1.9 million people have had both doses. The Health Secretary has announced an additional £6.6 billion of funding for the NHS in England. The money will be spent on continuing to deal with coronavirus, but there was also a pledge to start tackling the ever-growing backlog of procedures that have been postponed during the pandemic. Our health editor Hugh Pym reports.
This experience was like being in a little bit of a hotel.
Yeah.
getting feedback from patients. Marcel Levy tours wards at University College London hospitals.
Hey guys.
He's both consultant and chief executive and will soon head back to the Netherlands to become the Dutch government's chief scientific advisor.
Hello.
He's full of praise for the work of staff, but he says the NHS was not well set before the pandemic, with waiting lists growing steadily, so COVID cancellations have made an existing problem a lot worse.
COVID is actually a magnifying glass, making very clear that capacity in the NHS was not sufficient already for years, and that has now become very, very obvious. It's going to take, I'm afraid, a very long time to get where we want to be.
Does it need more money just to get through these procedures?
Yes, of course it will take more money, and of course we will try to do this as efficient as possible, but you can only treat all those patients if you introduce even more weekend working, evening working, extra shifts, extra operating theatre time.
An extra £6.6 billion has now been allocated to the NHS in England, some of which will be used to help cut waiting lists. There'll be proportionate increases for Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland.
I'll have a nice warm bath when I come home from work.
Chris can only hope it'll make a difference. He was keen on sport, but arthritis over the last few years has made that impossible. He's been told he needs a knee replacement and has been waiting nearly a year.
It's frustration, absolute frustration that, you know, I lay awake at night worrying about getting up to work next day and thinking, am I going to be okay? Am I going to be able to get down steps in the morning and all that? And I get that. It's just frustration, to be honest.
The charity Versus Arthritis said it was vital that some of the new money would be focused on cutting waiting times for joint replacements. Marcel Levy believes the NHS is a very strong organisation. It just needs to build up capacity now to cope with the impact of the next pandemic. Hugh Pym, BBC News.
Fewer than 1 in 6 female victims of sexual assault in England and Wales reported it to the police. That's according to the Office for National Statistics. The figures from March 2019 to March 2020 highlight the hundreds of thousands of women who experience sexual violence every year. Our special correspondent Lucy Manning has been talking to 2 women, one who told the police about an attack and another who didn't.
Women are suffering in silence, embarrassed and afraid to go to the police. Stephanie Tubritt was one of them, attacked and sexually assaulted. Like many, she never reported it. She's chosen to waive her anonymity.
I feel like if I was to report someone for shoplifting, they'd be dealt with a lot quicker than a woman who says she's been abused or has been raped or assaulted. And it's quite sad, really, because a lot of women are ignored and their experiences are brushed under the mat. And I can understand why they wouldn't want to report it as someone who hasn't reported it myself.
Data that asks people about their experience of crime has shone a light on the numbers of young women affected by the most serious sexual assaults.
Latest figures show over the last 3 years, around 1 in 40 women aged between 16 and 24 experienced rape or assault by penetration. Fewer than 1 in 6 reported it to the police. And overall, there were more than 750,000 victims last year of sexual assault. Those figures have actually gone down from the year before, but 4 times as many women were affected than men.
As a woman, I have never met another woman who has not experienced sexual assault, sexual harassment or sexual abuse. I think it's a lot more than 1 in 40. I truly do. And it makes me sad that it's only now that a woman has been murdered, that these sorts of figures are being taken seriously.
Honey Lyons was raped in Cambridge. She did tell police and her attackers were jailed. She's also waived her anonymity.
I think my advice to people would always be to go and do it and report this crime, because the more it's reported, hopefully the more likely we will be to reduce the stigma around it. But it's just so difficult.
Sisters, united, will never be defeated.
After pressure from campaigners following the death of Sarah Everard, police will now record misogyny as a hate crime. It's hoped this will encourage more women to report when they're attacked. Lucy Manning, BBC News.
And if you want more information on the issues raised in that report, do go to the BBC Action Line. The details are on the screen now. It's 10 years this week since the start of the war in Syria and the attempt to oust the regime of President Bashar al-Assad.